Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1247 of the Locked on Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And thank you for joining us, as always, on this podcast, making us your first listen each and every day. That includes podcast offerings like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube, Stitcher, and everywhere that you like to find podcasts. I am joined on today's show by my friend and arch rival, Kevin Chouinard of Hawks.com. Kevin and I talked for quite a bit of time about the Atlanta Hawks, almost an hour on this podcast. It was actually recorded on Monday, so keep that in mind, but nothing's really changed since then for the Hawks. As a plug, real quickly, before I get to Kevin and I talked extensively last night on Tuesday and Wednesday about Trae Young's All-NBA success, and congratulations again to Trae Young. Elsewhere, I talked about Zach LaVine's potential appeal for the Hawks, DeAndre Ayton, and the rumors there. Earlier this week, I was talking to Glenn Willis about the Hawks-related matters. We had last week, we had Andrew Kelly on for 2 or 3 podcast episodes, player capsules, draft stuff, wall-to-wall coverage. We're still cooking here in the offseason. I appreciate everybody listening to the show. We'll have much more coming up with Glenn on player capsules. We have some draft content coming up. Ricky O'Donnell is scheduled to join us in the near future. And wall-to-wall coverage. Please subscribe to the podcast. And without further delay, here is the intro, and I'll be back with myself and Kevin Chouinard.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm joined now by my friend and I guess arch enemy in some respects, the host of the ATL 29 podcast, writer for Hawks.com. What else do you do? Social for Bally Sports. What else is on your dance card these days? It's Kevin Chouinard. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you for making me a YouTube star.
You can watch Kevin's shining face and mine on YouTube if you want to watch this podcast or just listen to it. That's okay as well. I try not to bug Kevin very often. We talk a lot. We spend lots of time together at arenas and things, and I appreciate you taking some time in the midst of the offseason to come on the podcast. First, I'm asking this to everyone, so it's not only you that I'm doing this to. It's a very big picture question, and I want to know kind of how you're feeling about the Hawks right now, both in terms of it was a season that was kind of disappointing in some respects, and also, now that we're in the dead zone of the offseason in terms of getting the draft's coming and all that stuff. There's lots of people that are looking forward and getting excited again. Where are you at mentally on May 20 something about the Atlanta Hawks?
I think they have tough choices to make. I look at the Hawks and I look at the teams that are left in the playoffs. And I think about the last couple of years of what the Hawks have been in Atlanta. And the Hawks are built to beat a certain kind of team. They are built to beat the Philadelphias of the world.
Yes.
They can punish the heck out of drop coverage. They have a lot of bigs. They can compete with someone like Joel Embiid with Clint Capella in there. But I look at the Golden States and Dallas and Miami, and I get a little bit worried about the future of the NBA, and are the Hawks aiming towards that moving target of where the league is going? Are they set up to beat the teams that are going to be the best teams for the next 5 years and the preeminent styles that they're going to face?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I was going to ask you kind of about the Miami series. It's sort of a good jumping off point because Miami defensively is quite good. So that's worth pointing out as well. But they do play the very switchable scheme. They're kind of, Bam is clearly, a center, but they have the ability to play small. They have the ability to kind of withstand some weaknesses. They were obviously playing Tyler Hero or Duncan Robinson or whoever at some points. But for the most part, they got at least 4 guys on the court that are all good defenders, and they're all strong and versatile guys. And clearly it was kind of outlier bad, just how bad it was for the Hawks in that series. They just could not score. Trae series, all that stuff. But that was on my agenda to ask you, like, what concerns you? Because there's this competition already about the Hawks needing a number 2 option. That's been a competition for a long time, and it got a lot louder after that series. But even the guys they have now, Trae famously destroys drop coverage, and he did some success last year in the playoffs against some switching with Milwaukee. But what did that series tell you in particular, both about the current guys and also what they might need? Because clearly there's this like 2-pronged conversation about what they have to address that I know you heard Tony say and Travis say and even Nate say about secondary creator and defensive help. That's kind of the two pillars. But what did you take away? Was it just as simple as they need more firepower? Like, was there issues with Trey? Like, what did that series, kind of the way it ended, tell you about the team?
That's a lot of questions, Brad.
I know. I asked like 7. I'm a terrible host. I'm like a 7. I'm glad you'll actually call me on it, because most people are just like going to answer me because they're on a podcast. I appreciate you being like, look, that's 12 questions you asked me at once. Go wherever you want.
The Miami series, it's funny because the Hawks, they do need more offense. They need someone who can help Trey on offense, someone who can have the ball when defenses tilt his way. So they need more offense. They need more defense, but I don't think their true identity is as a defensive team. But they can be a lot better. You look at a team like Dallas, watching Dallas in the playoffs, they were a great defensive team in the regular season, but when you get to the games that matter for a 7-game series, can Trey be as good as Luka has been? And I think he can be. Like, Luka's not been good.
Defensively, you mean? Defensively, you mean? Yes.
Yeah, defensively.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought we were still on defense.
No, I just want to make sure people understand what you're, because anytime you go Trey and Luka, there's this whole sidebar thing that. So,
but it's hard not to make that comparison here, just because they're defensive weak links. So I'm not trying to do it because of the draft thing. I'm trying to do it because they're number one options who are bad at defense. And I think Trey, because he can move his feet, can be better than what Luka has been. And I think we've seen it, like, not in huge, long intervals, but in short spurts and short series. I think Trey can be pretty darn good on defense with decent pieces around him. But, again, sort of looking at the future of the league, and what lessons do you take away? Like, being a great offensive team in the regular season isn't good enough. You can't be Utah. Like, that's a bad recipe. Having a bunch of weak defensive wings and a stout defensive center and the number one offense in the league, that's not a recipe to get you far in the postseason. Golden State, Dallas, Miami, Boston, these are all great defensive teams. And, the Hawks have to figure out a way to get into that party without necessarily maybe being as good at defense as them, but also better on offense. And it's going to be a tricky balance. You're going to have to balance the bigs just right. You're going to have to figure out that balance between offensive creation to help Trey and defense just right. And it's a thorny little dance. There's a lot of subtlety to it, but I'm optimistic because they have, some pieces. I think Okongwu can fit that kind of style. I think DeAndre Hunter can fit that kind of style. And I think, someone like Trey, like I said, I think he can be better than Luka has been on defense, just because, he's a determined little son of a gun, and, he can move his feet. There have been times this season where he's got to make a rotation and he sees it and he makes that quick recognition, and he's just so fast that he can get where he wants and make things happen. So I think they can get there, looking big picture at this stuff, but there's a little bit of a style concern here. And, we still have to be careful. It's like, the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, is way better than the West. And they still have Milwaukee, and they still have Philadelphia, and they still have no, not the Knicks. But
the Nets, maybe the Nets. If you want to go to New York, maybe.
But yeah, there's a certain style that they've got to figure out how to beat, because there are a lot of good teams in this genre at the current moment.
That's a good place to put that. I'm going to ask a couple more things, of course. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by Rock Auto. The auto world has started to make some models these days. It makes it impossible for the local chain store dealership to have all of the car or truck parts that you actually need for your automobile. And even if they actually have them, do you want to endure all the questions for the person behind the counter? All they want to do is sell you what they want to sell you from the warehouse or behind the counter or whatever actually happens to help them with their commission or anything like that. Instead, do what's best for you, and that's rockauto.com, which can be accessed at home or in your pocket. It's a much better option overall. Why spend more for the exact same parts at any chain store dealership where you can actually order them at rockauto.com for much cheaper and in very easy fashion? selection. RockAuto.com is a family business. They've had customers for more than 20 years at this point, and the prices at Rock Auto are reliably low for each and every customer, no matter who you are. They have all of what you need and want for your car at Rock Auto. That includes brake parts and tail lamps, motor oil, even carpet. And the website is rockauto.com today. Check it out and see all what's available for your car or your truck. And when you get there, use the term locked on in the box that asks you how that you heard about rockauto.com, so they know that we sent you to them. Once again, that is locked on in that box. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Rockauto.com. Kevin, you said a lot there about, Trey on defense and the fact that I think we all know this, but this is going to be an offensive identity team. And there's nothing wrong with that. The Warriors are a unique example, and that's maybe why they've won so many titles, in that they have the small, I want to say small because he's not that small, but Steph Curry is a point guard sized human that is their fulcrum. And usually teams built like that are offense first. And obviously they have sky high offensive highs, but they have also been really good defensively for the majority of the decade now. And that's what you want, obviously. It's just kind of tough to find that, which is why everyone's trying to build that way. I think it is realistic that the Hawks will still probably need to be, uber elite offensively and just good defensively versus what some of these teams are like your Bostons and Miami. So let's just say Boston and Miami. They're in the conference finals. Both those teams are better defensively than they are on offense. That's pretty clear. I think the Hawks might have to go the other direction on that just because of their personnel, unless you just want to overhaul the entire thing, which they're not going to do. But there is a baseline. I think that's it gets under discussed sometimes of how good you have to be defensively. Even, it's kind of weird. Dallas is a good example too, because Dallas, personnel wise, Dallas is not incredible defensively, but they played so well this year defensively under Kidd. And I was wrong about that hire. It's worked out very well for them, but that's maybe what you're aiming for, in that it's scheme, it's effort, it's execution. It's not necessarily defensive talent. They don't have Rudy Gobert on the Mavs. They don't have, these incredible defensive players. Like, they have guys who can guard, Dorian Finney-Smith and Reggie Bullock and whoever else you want to say. Maxi Kleber's a really versatile, good piece, but they don't have an all-NBA first-team guy on that roster. And the Hawks, Capella's gotten to that level, and maybe Okongwu gets to that level at some point. But other than that, they don't really have those guys either. So is it just as simple as upgrading the talent defensively, or is it a situation where the guys on the roster have to be? I think it's kind of both, probably. But do you think they have to make sweeping changes to the personnel to be good enough defensively, or is it a situation where you can kind of hope that guys like Hunter and Okongwu continue to develop and kind of become your difference makers? Long pause.
That's a good question.
Long pause, Kevin. It's okay.
Yeah, they have to upgrade. Like when you were talking about Dallas, I was like, wait, I wanted to stop you and say, no. Dorian Finney-Smith is
he's good.
Great defender. We can't pass him off as
he's really good.
Pretty good at defense. Like
he's good. He is really good. But the thing about Dorian Finney-Smith, not to derail you, is like that's an undrafted guy who just basically willed himself into the role that he's in. He's got defensive talent for sure, but he's their best defender. I agree with you, but it wasn't like he was this huge pedigree guy defensively. He just kind of came out of nowhere and earned a spot because he busted himself on, and that's credit to him. He's been awesome. So it's kind of interesting as a comparison.
I guess if I had to pick in that dichotomy that you gave me a few seconds ago, I think you have to upgrade the personnel defensively, but in a very specific way. Like I maybe a couple of names that kind of point you in the right direction here would be, like Solomon Hill or PJ Tucker. Like you need a veteran who's just going to kick people in the butt for starters and hold people accountable and, help you get through the grind, because the 82-game seasons are really miserable thing. And there's a lot of games there, and, it can't always come from the coaches. I think you have to have some players on the roster who can, tell a superstar, hey, you need to do this. And this is, if you do it this other way, it's just not going to be good enough. And, to do that has to be a veteran. And so I think you have to, get that guy who's over 30 years old, who can play some defense, who can, function maybe as a small big in a switchable scheme. There are all those guys around the league sort of maybe that's not, it doesn't always have to be a big, but like somebody like Marcus Smart, you need that veteran who kind of sets the tone
Yeah.
and can tell people what needs to happen. But it's going to be a tricky dance. And on the flip side, this is kind of switching topics here, but like when you look at the direction that the league is heading, I get worried about the short term future of the Hawks in this sense. Like if you're going to be seeing this kind of small ball defense all the time with switching and big guards and small bigs and lots of physicality and the referees allowing the physicality. What does it look like for the Hawks? Number one, under Nate McMillan. Number two, under Nate McMillan with no Danilo Gallinari. Like, for a really long time, the Hawks have relied on, hey, okay, here's the switching team. Well, we're going to punish them in the post with Danilo and try to go one-on-one. And it's like, there were a lot of criticisms of Nate, and I think one of the fairest is that the Hawks haven't been good against that kind of defense. And taking away his favorite option against that scheme is problematic. So, if the Hawks can't afford Gallinari next season and he ends up somewhere else, how do the Hawks attack a switching defense? I think they're going to need to come up with some new tunes, a new playlist, if you will.
Yeah, no, I think that it's not been the most creative, and we talked about this offline as well. But Nate really, really likes to mismatch hunt, which a lot of coaches do. It's not a thing that only he does by any stretch, but that is his crutch. And Gallo, because of Gallo's just sheer size and the ability to shoot over anybody that's standing in front of him, basically, has been a good weapon for them to do that. But even if Gallo's back, that can't be your plan A or even plan B again. At his age and with all this stuff going, he's not going to play enough, all that stuff moving forward to where like it's a useful tool. But in terms of, they probably need to be better personnel wise as well. Like having one more guy that can break the defense down against a one-on-one situation. Because look, Trey's really good. We all know this. You can have faith in Trey to beat his guy. But he's really the only guy on their roster that in a switch against a good defender. Let's say PJ Tucker is a great example. You brought him up earlier. I know Hawks fans don't love PJ Tucker, but he's extremely valuable in the playoffs. He just is. He's a great playoff player. So we use him as an example. Trey's the only guy on the roster right now that you can say with any confidence is going to be able to beat PJ Tucker one-on-one in a switch. They don't have anybody else that can do that on their team, right? I mean, obviously one-offs, some guys can do it, but not regularly speaking. And, for I love Collins as a guy. I think I'm high on Collins, but he's not the greatest mismatch hunter against anyone that's like not guard. If it's a guard, he can beat you guy. He can beat you up like that. But he's not a guy you can just throw the ball to against anybody and say, go get a bucket. That's not really what he does. He can do a little bit of that, but they don't have that number two guy to do that. That's a very obvious take, but it is true that when teams are switching, especially if they don't have huge holes, you have to be able to beat good defenders. Like if you're playing the Celtics, unless they're playing Peyton Pritchard, they don't have anybody out there that's not a good defender. So you have to be able to beat that without just saying, pick on that guy. Occasionally you'll play the Mavs with Luka or the Heat with Tyler Hero and you have a spot. Or if you're playing the Hawks, it's Trey or whatever. But there are teams out there in the playoffs, in particular, at the highest levels. And that's the thing. When you're the Hawks and you made the conference finals, you're thinking about the highest levels now. And you have to have a way, or at least a couple of theories on how to beat opposing defenses. And we saw in that Heat series, it's a small sample size, but like there wasn't a lot going on there. It was kind of like, oh, we don't have a plan C. At minimum, they might have had a plan B. They didn't have a plan C in that series. There was no like alternate thing that really did much. And obviously our mutual friend Glenn had some ideas and stuff like that. People that are great at X's and O's, but they didn't seem to me to have a ton of answers to the highest level defenses. And that is a problem when you get to the highest level.
Yeah, and I think they have to go that route. Like when you talk about, well, where can you do this? I think Gallinari's spot is maybe where you can make some changes. I think you need someone more in the Grant Williams vein for that position. Somebody who's 6'6". It pains me to say this, but it's not my favorite aesthetic in terms of basketball. I am not a big fan of the 6'6" guy posing as a center, waiting for somebody to drive the lane, and then, oh God, he hit me. I and then
you love flops.
flopping. Like, it's just really kind of disgusting. But if we're laying out the axioms of how do the Hawks get better, they have to play within that framework.
Yeah.
And I think they need to go a little bit more defense at that spot than offense. I think that's a spot where you go for the veteran leader. I think that's where you go for a switchable defender, maybe somebody who can, do all of that and be a good rebounder next to Okongwu, because I think Okongwu can function very well in that kind of scheme too. You just got to be very cognizant of, hey, he's going to need some help on the defensive glass.
Yep.
Especially since when you do that, you're going to be in a scheme that pulls the big further from the paint, and so you're going to have to be a little deeper, 1 through 5 in rebounding. So if you can find a person who's 6'7", can shoot just basic corner threes, but just move feet on defense, be an absolute speed bump in the post defensively, so that you just can't move them, and help Okongwu a little bit rebounding wise. I think that's the kind of player that you're going to need to function in the space where the league seems to be heading.
Yeah, that would help them on defense, to be sure. And as much as there's so much talk about just 3-and-D in general as to who players are, it is kind of funny, though, after all of this time, the Hawks really don't have anyone that's just a 3-and-D guy. Like, Hunter's the closest, but he doesn't like to just be a 3-and-D guy on offense. Like, he likes to do some stuff with the dribble. Like, a lot of teams have that. Dorian Finney-Smith's a great example of a guy who doesn't do really anything on offense except shoot threes. Or PJ Tucker crashes the glass and stuff, but he's really going to go to the corner and shoot threes and do, like, the Hawks don't really have a pure 3-and-D guy on the team anywhere. It's kind of interesting. Like, Solomon Hill was kind of that when he was playing, because he didn't, but his three is kind of a low, very, very low tier three. He'll shoot them. He's not a great shooter.
2.1.
Yeah. He's not really a 3-and-D guy. Okay. I'm going to change gears on you in a second, but first, another word from our sponsors, our final break on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by Truebill, and free trials often renewed without your consent. If you didn't know that, it's actually because a business scam is trying to get you. Do not let corporations pocket your money out of their own greed. Instead, download Truebill right now and take control of your subscriptions across the board. Truebill is an app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions that you don't want, don't need, or even forgot about entirely. On average, people save up to $720 a year using Truebill. Truebill makes it incredibly simple when it comes to canceling subscriptions. That's important because companies just make it very hard to cancel on purpose for their own benefit. Link your accounts together, and Truebill will cancel all of those online subscriptions in just one tap. As somebody who mentions a lot of subscriptions, I just want to keep up with all the stuff from the sports world. I have to say, Truebill is awesome, and I highly recommend it. Truebill has more than 2 million users, and they've helped people save more than $100 million in the course of their business. And I will just say this: do not fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. Go right now to Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. It could save you thousands, yes, thousands each and every year. Truebill.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Kevin, we talked about sort of what they can do. I'm not going to make you do the fake trade podcast with me. That's Andrew Kelly's domain. But it is interesting to me. Like, this is very broad, so forgive me. But are you in the camp of, like, they have to make a big swing? Because that's something I know you see it like I do from Hawks fans. They really want to go star hunting now. Hawks fans do. I get why. I mean, clearly, shiny new object, number one. A lot of teams have that number 2 guy that is, you could say, better, more famous than John Collins, whatever you want to say it is. Or is it just like what you laid out? Like, maybe you just turn the Gallo spot into something else, or maybe you just kind of work on the margins, maybe make one trade involving somebody, whether it's Herter or Bogey or whoever. So do you fall on one side? Obviously, it depends on who's available, but are you someone that thinks they have to try to push a lot of chips in now, or can I be patient?
I mean, I think that could be kind of a pitfall. I mean, I think for me, it entirely depends on what the actual trade is.
You're speaking my language now, Kevin. Nuance, baby.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you don't make a trade just for a trade's sake, but, I think there are some pieces that you can move. You look at the depth of the roster, and, they have 3 bigs, and they're spending a lot of money on Collins and Capella, and that could be a spot where you move one of the two. They've got Herter, they've got Bogdanovic, and those are they're not the same. I mean, they have very stark differences. Like Bogey, defensively, he's good at being strong and not getting moved around. Herder's good at chasing around screens. On offense, Herder's great at shooting and getting to the dotted line for floaters. Bogey is great at shooting and getting into the paint for a fall away. But I think, there's some duplication there in the sense that I think, when you're trying to put scorers around Trey, you really need to have, Trey and one of those two guys and maybe someone else who's a little bit more of a vertical threat. And I don't mean vertical in the get up and alley-oop kind of sense, but more, just get to the rim sets. Can you get from the 3-point line to the rim and get a defense rotating? Dallas with Luka in this playoffs, Jalen Brunson has been fantastic. And if you look at the splits on Dallas's offense, when they have Brunson in, things go great. When you have Luka out there without Brunson, the offense kind of dies a bit.
It's a lot harder. Yeah.
You kind of need somebody who can get all the way into the restricted area for a basket. Not only for the offense and the baskets that you get out of that, but you just need that defense to move. Because if you have that other guy, that frees up Luka or it frees up Trey. When you have that kind of secondary threat who gets a defense in rotation. Herder and Bogdanovic don't, they do good things on offense, but they don't get you crazy in defensive rotation the way someone like Brunson can, because he's just quicker. And that gets a defense moving. Jordan Poole in the playoffs has kind of been the same thing. He's a great shooter, but he's shown a lot of craft on drives that gets a defense shifting. And it's always hard to say how much of that is Steph.
No, obviously that helps. That helps anybody.
What would Jordan Poole look like on the Hawks? Maybe not quite as well, but I still think though that you need somebody who's more of a vertical threat, somebody who can just go from point A away from the rim to point B under the rim and get things happening there on offense for the Hawks. And so in terms of trading, if you've got this duplication of bigs, if you've got this duplication of wings, you may have to make some hard choices of, do we need a different variety in the mix? And then at that point, it's all value. But I've gotten so far away from your original question, but okay. It's always going to be the nuance of, is this going to fit what we need? Does it make the balance right? And I think there's some rebalancing for the roster that needs to be done, but it depends entirely on the pieces that you would bring in.
Sure. I mean, on my agenda of notes to maybe ask you about kind of goes to this point, and it's a hypothetical because we don't know what they would get back. But let's say, for example, they were to more actively look to move on from Clint now to kind of pave the way for a Kongwu. That's kind of, you alluded to it's not a log jam. Like, they have a great center right now. Today they can play 48 minutes of really good center play, and that's actually extremely valuable. But my party line is like, you don't draft a Kongwu 6 to have him be your backup center for 4 years. That isn't usually what you do there. And I think long term they're going to have to make a decision there on one or the other. And it seems more likely to me they move on from Clint at some point than they do for Kongwu. I'm not saying that's going to happen. Maybe if there is a star move this offseason, for instance, maybe it involves a Kongwu going out for somebody like that. But if it's a more peripheral move, it's probably Clint for help somewhere else, and then you kind of elevate a Kongwu. It's obviously very tough to do this without knowing what it would be, but do you think a Kongwu is ready to be a more like full-time 32-minute a game center? And like, what do you lose? I think I know what I think they lose, but what do you lose if you move on from Clint? Because for me, he's been the anchor, like, so clearly their anchor and defensive force the last 2 years. You could say they haven't been great defensively, but he individually has been really good. So what do you lose there if you move on from Capella and elevate a Kongwu?
You lose a lot of depth. One of the things that you've got to be worried about, I think, with a Kongwu is if he's a starter, one of the things you're always going to have to worry about is foul trouble. Right now he has. What's that?
He does foul a lot. I was pulling the numbers right now to talk to you about that because he averaged for 36 minutes this year 5.4 fouls per 36. So
Yeah, so
it's a
that's
lot.
concerning. So you're always gonna have to be careful in that realm. You know, you're losing a lot of rebounding. How many people are better rebounders than Clint right now
It might
when he's
it,
healthy?
it might be zero. Literally, it might be zero. I mean, he's certainly in the top 5 in the league rebounding in my mind when he's
Yeah.
right.
So you're losing a top five rebounder. So that's what you're losing. But at the same time, Clint has obvious limitations. Like Clint in a lot of ways. I said going back 20 minutes, I was like, you can't be Utah.
Yeah.
And Clint brings a lot of those limitations. Like he's not a good finisher around the rim, which isn't a great thing when you're playing with Trae Young. Like somehow you got to you've got to maximize finishing opportunities at the rim if you're going to succeed with Trae Young in the lineup, because if there's one thing that he can do, it's pass. That's the signature thing Trae can do, is he can get a big man good looks at the rim. If your big isn't finishing those, that's not great. Like you look at the numbers of field goal percentage or something real basic like that, and it doesn't look that bad, but there's a lot of low hanging fruit to pick there in terms of getting a center who can finish at the rim. Honestly, to me, that's like there was the hypothetical Rudy Gobert trades,
Yeah.
and those don't excite me, but he's too expensive. He's too old. We've seen the way there's a very specific recipe for beating him. But it's like I'd be intrigued to see what it looks like with a better finisher with Trae. Like Gobert, like
Yeah.
you haven't seen Gobert with a great passer. He's a pretty darn good finisher. If you put him next to Trae, there's a lot of offense that you're going to get with him that you don't get with Capella. So I think you'd also be losing a bad finisher at the rim. I think I don't know that a Kongwu has that kind of chemistry with Trae yet either, and he's not big enough to really take advantage of that. But I think there are ways that the Hawks could replace Capella, and even if you're losing the rebounding and you're losing the defense and you're losing the fact that you're pretty safe with 48 minutes of great defensive play at center, I think you could improve in other ways, and one of them would be finding someone who can maximize the two-man offense with Trae. That seems to me like some very low-hanging fruit that they could use to get better and replace Clint, even though you're going to lose a lot when you lose Clint.
Yeah, and I think even as someone who I think I am higher on Capella than most people are, and I am not banging the table that they have to. There's definitely a lot of people that think that they have to trade Clint now, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think he is still a good player. You could easily argue he was their second best player the last 2 seasons. Like he's been really good in a lot of different ways, but you're right about limitations. Other than the fact that he does have a lot of gravity as a screener and roller, but his finishing beyond dunks is just basically nil, and we know that at this point. And Okongwu, beyond the fact that he's a lottery pick who's showing a lot of talent, he's a great touch guy. He might be able to shoot long term. They're hoping he'll be able to shoot at some point. He hasn't yet, which is certainly important to keep that in mind. There's this thought that like he'll definitely. I mean, I think he'll be able to shoot eventually. We don't know that for sure. He's not proven that at all. But minimum, he's got a lot more touch than Capella does. He's a really good athlete. I know he's kind of small, and I think that clearly they know that they have to invest something in backup center if they were to do that. Like you can't just, plan on that, bringing back Gorgie Jang and calling it a day there. I think that you have to kind of do something else. Maybe you want to get a true, maybe not 7-footer, but more of a big physical guy behind the Okongwu just for matchup sake. If you're playing your Embiids of the world or your Jokic's of the world, maybe you bring back Dwayne Dedmon, so something like that, like a Dedmon level, not a starter, but a good backup type. You can play Collins there as well. And I think, honestly, if you were to keep John, he's another popular topic of conversation, I think we talked, I talked about this a lot, but him and Capella were never the greatest fit together. They made it work, and a lot of that was John ceding ground out of being a team player and making it work. But you might actually get more more out of Collins again if you were to move on from Capella as well. I think Collins' offensive ceiling might go up a little bit higher again once if you were to move on from Clint, because he becomes maybe more of a primary role man more often than he has been recently. Because anytime he's playing with Capella or a Kongwu, those guys have to be the role men for the most part, because that's all they can really do on the court at the moment, other than just being a dunker spot. So I said a lot there, but I think it's just interesting to me to think about what they might do, because Capella is a guy that they certainly could move on from. One of the theories when they gave him the extension was, they're doing this to make him tradable in the future. I'm not sure if that's the case, but this would be a good time to do it. He finished strong, had a good season, obviously was banged up in the playoffs. But if you're worried about Capella maybe, 10% declining, you might want to go ahead and move him now, because he's at the age where he might start getting a little bit worse every season. And that's a concern for a guy who's signed for 3 years at real money. So I don't know. I'm not saying they have to do it, but clearly that's, and again, that also helps you to address another issue, because he has value. You don't trade Capella for a draft pick. You trade Capella to give you somebody that can help you now on the perimeter somewhere else. So that might do sort of your two birds with one stone kind of thing.
Yeah, and if I'm one of the other 28 teams in the league and I'm looking at trading for Gobert versus trading for Capella, I want Capella. Like, just
probably so.
The difference in dollars alone is,
and capital, because Utah is not going to give up Gobert for a pittance. Like, you could probably get, I know you can get Capella for a lot less in terms of assets plus money. It's a better contract, and Gobert's better than Capella. No, we're not saying otherwise. He's a better player, but I certainly think for a lot of teams, it would make more sense to maybe go move. And that's why you go back to, like, I do understand. I'm kind of where you are on the Gobert hypothetical for the Hawks, because it doesn't really excite me that much. But I'm also aware enough to say, look, if they want, they would be awesome in the regular season at bare minimum. If you go out and get Rudy Gobert and pair him with Trae Young, you talk about the offense, the defense. Like, Utah, for all of their playoff foibles, wins 50 plus games every year, and there's a reason for that. He's really good at that. So, like, if you're Tony Ressler and you want to just guarantee a top 4 seed every year, it wouldn't be the worst thing to do. I think that might cap your ceiling a little bit, but I do understand it at least. I'm kind of with you, though. It's not like my most exciting thing in the world.
Yeah, I think, if you look around the landscape of the league and say, who is the ideal fit next to someone like a Kongwu, maybe it's somebody like Zubac, like somebody who has value as a role man,
good defender,
who he's the kind of guy you want out there to start games, physical, big, can roll with Trae, and eat up some of the fouls. And then you get to the fourth quarter and 10 minutes to go in the game, you put a Kongwu in and he's just going to finish the game for you. You sort of have a starter and a finisher. And then the Hawks, they kind of do that, a lot of times with Capella and a Kongwu. But I think, just in terms of stature and salaries and stuff like that, I think it's more palatable for somebody like Zubac than it would be for someone like Capella.
Yep.
But, I think that's the kind of guy that fits there. I don't think you can just say, trade Capella and Kongwu's the guy. Like, it's going to be a hard sell. I think you need kind of a mix to kind of fill in the holes on the back end. But I am excited. Like, I think one thing that we haven't seen in the Trae Young era, and it's part of the reason why I was excited about Gorgui Dieng when things were just kind of falling catastrophically for the Hawks.
You love Gorgui Dieng
in November and December. I mean, yeah, but I mean, it was the the part of it was just that things were bad enough that Gorgui wasn't going to make things worse. But what we haven't seen for Trae is they haven't played a lineup that's a 5-out lineup that wasn't going to get killed defensively. Like, they can play 5-out and put Collins at center, and those lineups score points, but they also hemorrhage points. Like,
yeah, you're playing him next to Hunter at the 4 or Gallo at the 4, and you're automatically you can't rebound and all those things. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, so I one of the things I'm excited about for Okongwu, and I hope that this happens, is I think that he's going to be able to shoot. I don't think there's any reason to say, oh yeah, he's not going to be able to shoot. He's going to be able to shoot, and you're going to be able to make some 5-out lineups where Trae can really do some stuff. I think that's part of the way that you get. That's part of the way that you make life better for Trae against the Bostons and the Miamis and the Dallases and the Golden States. Is you make these lineups that are 5-out They're okay defensively, and they give Trey a chance to operate in space instead of these tight confines where he's trying to dance around multiple bodies. I think he needs a little bit more space on the floor against those kind of lineups without a roll man, without somebody in the dunker spot, so that when there's help on Trey at the rim, that help is coming from further away, and the defense is way more in rotation than it would be if someone like Clint is in there. I think there is some potential there with some 5-out lineups on offense for the Hawks to do some things that make defenses more uncomfortable than what they're doing now.
Yeah, you give them more space in general, and especially because in this hypothetical, you have guys like Collins and Okongwu who can actually do both. They can also be a roll man if you want them to be on the floor, but if they want those guys to pick and pop and get out of the way, that versatility is really helpful. Whereas if you're playing Capella, and again, both of us are very pro Capella, he can only do one thing. He's going to roll, and he's going to be in the dunker spot, and that's it. If you're playing lineups with him, you know where he's going to be for the most part. He can't space to the corner to give Trey more space. That's not an option. We've seen that with Collins. Collins can do that. Okongwu, you hope, can do that long term. And I agree. I'm actually really intrigued by that because they were so good at anyway this year offensively, but they still have room to grow, especially in a playoff scenario or just from a versatility standpoint. And I would be intrigued by that because bringing it back full circle, this is still a team that has to win on offense for the most part, in my mind. And this is not an indictment of Trae Young, but when you cast your lot with Trae, like you're kind of just deciding we're going to be an offensive team first. You still got to guard. You still got to be good defensively. And we saw at their highest level last year during the playoff run and in the second half of the season, they were a top 12, 13 defense in the league. And that was underrated and kind of making them a lot better. This year, that team never appeared defensively. They were better in the second half, but still like 20th, not 12th. And that's a pretty big gap. And I think that, you still want to maximize your offense because at the end of the day, short of acquiring Donovan Mitchell, Kevin, they probably can't just outscore everyone in the world. That would be the plan if you acquire Donovan Mitchell, which I'm not a huge fan of, but necessarily. But I think your plan should still be awesome offensively, but just do enough defensively. And that means, but the thing is, the bar for enough at the highest level is still like you got to be good still. Like you may not be Boston, but you got to be this year's Dallas basically to be able to do that. And that's still a top 8
and that's
defense,
what they do. That's
defense.
like their best lineups. That the reason that Dallas got this far is that Maxi Kleber got hot for 2 weeks and they played 5 out. And if you can do that successfully, then you can take those steps and be in the conference finals again.
Yeah, and you want to make it easy, especially again in this hypothetical where you move on from Capella. You got to maximize Okongwu's strengths too. Like you don't want to treat him like he's Clint Capella. Like you need to use what he's really good at, and that is his speed and versatility and scheme versatility defensively. And he can still protect the rim.
And
hopefully,
he
can rebound.
Can make reads in the short roll. Like he's a basketball player. He's been playing basketball from a very young age. Like he's an exceedingly good passer. So, Capella made big strides in that area, but Okongwu still.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Okongwu.
Many charts higher in that realm.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like. Part of why I'm not sure I know we've seen a lot of Okongwu, but in general, they have not built a game plan around him. Like he still operates in the Capella game plan a lot of the time, which is the way it should be. Capella's playing more. I get that, but I really would be interested to see what this staff did and just in general how you approach it in a Okongwu centric team. He's not the best player on the team. That's obviously going to be Trey, but you can do a lot of things differently as your base with Okongwu than you can with Capella. And you could kind of have Collins in that role too and all that stuff. So, at this rate, they're going to trade Okongwu like tomorrow and they'll keep Capella and this will all be nil, Kevin. But it's too early to talk about the draft. Unless you have takes about the draft, I'm not going to ask you. The draft workouts are happening though. Have you talked to anybody interesting yet in draft workouts? Anybody
talked to anybody?
Well, there you go.
I went to talk to Tori Eason.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't let us in the building.
I forgot.
Tori Eason didn't want to talk. So.
I forgot about that one. Sorry. That was actually an accident. It's funny that brought that up because Tori Eason is by far, to this point when we're recording, the biggest name that's been in for the Hawks. So he was the one everybody was excited to talk to. That just did not happen. So he was, I think, the only guy that's been in for the Hawks through when we're recording this in late May that is, for me, in play at 16. I know like Jalen Williams is maybe a first round pick. He's coming in on the Monday we're recording this, but we're not quite there yet. And I know you're not like a huge college basketball observer, Kevin, so I'm not going to put you on the spot for your favorite draft guys yet. Anybody on your radar for agency or trade stuff? I know it's like we talked around it, but do you have a favorite? I know everybody in Hawks land seems to have like the guy they want, even if it's pie in the sky, from Shea to Rudy Gobert to Donovan Mitchell to on the lower level, like Malcolm Brogdon's been a popular name I've been seeing. Do you have anyone you're in love with? It might even just be like bring back DeLon Wright, which is maybe my take at this point. But what's your favorite hypothetical transaction? Do you have one yet, or are you still working on this? Resign Gorgie Jang for the minimum. So that's all you want.
And that's really open.
It's so hard.
Question.
I know it's so hard. I shouldn't.
No, it's a good question.
Solomon Hill for the minimum again, because hopefully he can play. I'm not kidding. If Solomon Hill is healthy enough to play basketball, they should sign Solomon Hill.
They should,
and I'm sure he'd like to come back.
That's a reasonable.
It won't change your life necessarily, but you said it earlier. Like even just the voice of Solomon Hill, and people laugh at us when we talk about this stuff, but we're relaying it from the staff, and like it matters. Like having a guy like that, you remember this? We covered the team when they brought Dedmon back, and everybody was like, "What are they? Why?" And it's like because that guy talks, and Travis, everybody, they're like, no one talks on this team. We want someone that's loud on the roster. And Solomon Hill's not necessarily that, but he is loud, number one, and just as a vet. And they don't have that guy. I mean, their vets this year were quiet vets. Like lose a vet, but lose a quiet vet. He's like a put your arm around him guy kind of guy. He's not going to be a barker. So
yeah, the vet chemistry on this team got a lot better when Cam Reddish was traded, and I don't really know why. Like as soon as Cam was out, it was like, oh yeah, we can be the cool veteran leaders again. And the vibe on the team got a whole lot better after that. And before that, it was very pins and needles. So,
and the results were maybe part of that too. I mean, they obviously were not playing early in the year as well, which might have been a huge factor in that. They start like 4-9, and that's I know our mutual friend Tyler Jones brings this up all the time. He rants about those 13 games like every time we talk because they started 4-9 last year. And I will say, I don't know how I even got here, but when you start that way, with expectations the way they had, that can kill your season in a lot of ways. Like it doesn't necessarily make your season untenable like in the standings, but if the mood is what it is, and if you start scrambling, which they kind of had to, but they also did, and that's how you get to never playing your young guys ever because you think you can't. And I think Nate even said that a few times, like, we're trying to win every night because we had to. Like they were behind the 8 ball all year long, and you can't play development minutes and you can't do things like that you want to do. It just screws you up. That wasn't the reason. That wasn't the only reason why they had a bad season, but it kind of does tell you, like, if you don't have that clubhouse or locker room chemistry, if your vibes are off from the beginning, you don't have vet leaders, it can hurt you. It's not as important as what's on the court, but it definitely can affect that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big holes that they've got to fix. But I'm excited about Sean D. Brown. Like,
go blue.
I mean, I just think that there's you look at the league and the way things are headed. I think it's hard for two-way guys to make an impact, but I think at his position, like he has a path. Like I don't think all two-way guys have a path to get in the rotation. Like I think there's a way that he gets minutes, like a bad situation and he performs for a week or two. Like I think there's a way that he can kind of put his foot in the door and kind of hold the door open.
Just make enough threes because if he plays defense, and he does, if he just makes enough threes, they liked him when he came in. I mean, you heard him. Nate liked him. I'm sure that's why they signed him at the end of the day. Yeah. But no, I agree. I mean, I'm obviously a little bit biased. He's a Michigan guy, but he certainly kind of plays. It's at a lower level, but he's kind of that switchable in theory guy. Exactly. 6'6", burly, strong, can move people. Clearly, you can't expect him to be awesome, but as a two-way, I like that signing a lot. It's a guy who you can plug and play, and that's a philosophy thing. I think I talked about it with Glenn recently on the podcast, but there are two philosophies with two-way guys. It's like you either want to aim for the sky on a guy who's probably never going to get there but has talent, or you aim for your plug and play types. Your Skylar Mays, your Shawnee Brown in this instance, Josh Majette back in the day when they wanted to just have their third point guard be that guy. There are schools of thought there. I think that Shawnee Brown is certainly in the plug and play side, but he's 23 and he could be a guy that's an NBA wing for a long time. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a path where he becomes a regular next season. Like I wouldn't like wager any substantial amount of money on it.
Go blue.
And
Again.
I'd never wager substantial amounts
I was
of
going
money
to say,
on anything, so I guess that's easy. But
if you enjoy that sort of thing, Kevin, you have to add that in there.
well, let me ask you a question.
Uh-oh. Here's where we're off the
Jalen
rails.
Johnson, year 2. What is it?
So I actually posted on Monday. Glenn and I talked about, it's a good time for me to plug this. Glenn and I talked about all the guys who were like kind of on the third team, which was Jalen and Sharif and all those guys. I think we sounded pretty optimistic about Jalen on that podcast, which is good because I am optimistic about Jalen. I think that not the only reason you move on from Gallo, but maybe one of the reasons is that you want to clear out something of a path for Jalen Johnson. I don't think you can just say Jalen's playing 20 minutes next year, come hell or high water. I wouldn't do that for a team that's trying to win like the Hawks are. But I think they should hope and plan for him to have a role. He's a talented guy. I think he showed a lot in the G League. He played well. The big question, you can probably imagine Glenn and I talked about, it's just the defense. It's like, can Nate trust him defensively is the question of all. And Nate is the guy that's just not going to trust young guys defensively. And I think that the hope is that Jalen comes a long way. Even during the offseason, like he's going to play in summer league, he'll have a full camp. That's the hope that he can get to a point where the staff headed by Nate trusts him on defense. And if they do, he can do a lot of things. I mean, he can play a little bit of three if you want him to. He's big. He's physical. He can score. He's one of their better ISO guys. If you had to kind of do that, if they had to like go get a bucket kind of thing, I'm excited. I've basically been as excited as I was in draft night about Jalen Johnson, just because I didn't expect him to do anything this year. So for me, my evaluation is almost exactly the same. Like he had a good year in the G League. He put up numbers. Like he did what you want him to do in the G League. So like I'm kind of where I was a year ago. I still really buy him. And I think this is clearly the year where like he can actually get on the court and show it a little bit. Are you excited about Jalen? I don't know where you are.
To a point, I think it's still a little bit of a rough fit.
Well, yeah, currently, especially with, not to go back to the conversation, but with Capella and stuff like that, like he's a theoretical shooter more than a real shooter at this point. He can shoot it and he will shoot it, but he's not a proven shooter. So if you're playing him next to Capella or next to a Kongwu, like there's not a lot of space there yet.
Right. Yeah. Well, you said like the key thing is defense, and for me the key thing is going to be shooting. I think
he's got to make shots.
Because I think there's going to be a cap on what he can do defensively. You know,
especially early on. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not putting any huge stock in his defense at this point. So for me, I think he's going to have to be a good shooter to really have value, and it's going to be a tough fit. I don't know. I think that he still has a lot of value, but it's going to be a tricky dance. I think it's more about, you know, what is he the year after this one than what is he this year? And for this year, it's just a matter of, you know, he's just still needs so many reps. So how do you get those reps without, you know, sabotaging is too strong a word, but, you know, you're trying to win now. It's tough to get young guys seasoning. Especially under a coach.
Well, like I was going to say, especially because, and listen, like, I know I said it, but he was never going to play this year. That was very clear to us pretty early on. I think that if you're Travis, even you kind of got to put the bug in Nate's ear. Like, all right, Nate, he's got to play a little bit. Like, you don't have to play him if you think he's killing you, but there's got to be a plan in year 2. Like, it can't just be another redshirt year. If you draft a guy at number 20 who is doing what he's done in the G League, I'm not saying you overstate the G League stuff, but if he plays himself out of it, he plays himself out of it. But I think that it's a hard sell this year, even when you're trying to win, to have him play 100 minutes again. That does not work. I think just, you know, PR wise, internally, all that stuff. If he's bad, and he'll show he's bad, and then you can pull him in my mind. But like, he can't play 100 minutes again. I don't think that'd be tough.
Yeah, I think really he just needs to play through it, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be a great season for him. But you know, if you want, he's a high risk, high reward kind of player. Like, I think he can be magnificent. Like, I think he can do a lot of things. But you know, I think to get to that point, you're going to have to play him through some adversity for this upcoming season. So you've got these competing goals, and you know, that's going to be a delicate balance. But you know, if you ask me what can he be in 2-3 seasons, I think he can be a lot. But he needs the seasoning, he needs the experience,
Yeah,
He
he's got to
needs
play.
the right fit of pieces around him and the right coaching situation. Like he just needs a lot of things to click, and it's going to be tricky.
Yeah, he's got to play more, and we'll see how they handle that. I know we'll be watching Summer League intently. He is going to be, along with whoever they draft in the first round, if they make a pick this year, and maybe Sharif as well, will be the guys that everyone's looking at Summer League, and that's the way it should be. I'll be intrigued. You don't want to overstate that either, but you can learn a lot. Like if, I think Glenn and I said, like, you want him to be looking so good in Vegas that he stops playing, like the third game. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he might need to play more because he just hasn't played that much, but it should be obvious, hopefully, that he just looks awesome, and that'll be the end of that. Kevin, we can probably talk for 2 hours, but I'm not gonna do that to you today. So we should get out of here. But please plug what you have going on. I know I said a lot of it at the beginning about your 12 jobs that you have. You're kind of rivaling me in your level of jobs that you have. And yours are actually better jobs than mine, to be fair, Hawks.com and such. But if you have anything else to add, feel free. And then if not, please share where the people can find your stuff.
No, I don't want to put that kind of pressure on myself. So. If I plug the podcast, then I got to make more episodes. So
there was a recent episode you guys recorded like last week. You and Kevin. I mean, you're not tasked with doing it every day like I am.
ATL and 29s during the playoffs. So yeah, okay, ATL and 29 podcast, but
it's an awesome listen.
It's a bi-weekly podcast.
That's okay.
None of this daily stuff.
You don't have. I am tasked with doing a podcast daily. It's a good thing most of the time. Sometimes it's awful, but I enjoy your podcast. Also, you write sometimes. Hawks.com.
Yeah, that's true.
You do social for Bally sometimes during the season.
Yeah.
I don't know about off season, but during the season you certainly do. You're always I sit next to Kevin at games, and Kevin is always doing some graphic or something, some video cut or something. He's a very busy man. Honestly, I have kind of a beautiful mind thing going during games, making my crazy notes, but Kevin is even crazier with all the stuff he has to do for social media stuff. So it's quite a scene when we're there, Statler and Waldorfing at basketball games.
And losing our hearing.
That too. Thank you again, Kevin. I do sincerely appreciate the time. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast. Check out, once again, ATL and 29, and we'll see you all next time.